said this before, but responsive web design 1 and 2, I feel like could have been smashed into like a hyper day of responsiveness, but I really want these concepts to wash over our brains for a couple days. And I want us to be able to think about all the things that we just learned yesterday and the things that we're going to learn today. And I want them to just kind of keep being on your mind, because we don't have a lot of time with direct instruction regarding HTML and CSS in this kind of course. We talk about it for 2 weeks basically, and it's when you're brand new. And then we just hit JavaScript for the rest of our days. So JavaScript, of course, in conjunction with HTML and CSS, like it's not all gone. But as far as directly instructing to it, these are precious days. So that's why I want to spread out as much time as we can to review basically the concepts that we've talked about. So yesterday, I brought in some media queries. In today's starter file, I want to look at the different ways. So yesterday we talked about putting the media query at the bottom of the page, and we talked about the desktop first mentality versus the mobile first mentality. And this is a different set of code, by the way, even though it looks the same. You can see the book of flight and the mobile buttons are different, right? And as we move them down, the same concept exists, though, where they both work and look the same way. So I want to review, again, everything we talked about yesterday, because you've had a day to struggle. And that struggle is going to open up questions. So make sure you use that questions thread here just like this. So we'll come back to those at the right time. Excuse me. So in review, at media is special syntax. We pass in the max width if we're using desktop design. What is the opposite when we're using mobile first engineering? What is the property we use? Very good, min width. All right, so based on yesterday's experiences, we learned that really you can engineer it any way you want. It just depends on who. Who makes those decisions? Does Twitter make those decisions? No, Big Boss does. So you have to make sure that you follow the lead, or if you are the leader, by the way, if you are the leader and you have the decision-making power, mobile first. Be a sheep, right? Like still fight the status quo once in a while, but make sure that when you have those arguments, they're on good ground. So in this case, if you were working on my team and you saw this code base, you would have to think, okay, how am I supposed to deal with this? How am I supposed to learn from this? I think a lot of junior developers mentalities that I've seen, maybe negative mentalities, is they only saw it one time and they idolized the person that showed them the one time. Whether it be a college professor, somebody at Lambda school, a mentor, one of their best friends, whatever. The person that taught them coding for the first time is layering on a bunch of opinions, as I am doing right now. And the reality is opinions don't matter. Like they're just that. So make sure that wherever you're working, you take in the full ecosystem before you start saying things like this sucks, for example. That being said, if you worked with me, you'd be doing media queries right after the selector, because I hate going down to the bottom of the page. I feel like it's harder to read and harder for the next developer to figure out where everything exists. Plus, this stuff gets abstracted away really nicely when we start using nesting and preprocessors. So this is kind of a precursor to tomorrow. So I just want to give you some thoughts here and also tell you, they could change anywhere. So in this case, this doesn't change though. The syntax does not change. This stuff can change, by the way. You could actually use rems here if you wanted, or ems, and we're going to be talking about that today. So these kinds of things can change as well. But the syntactical structure of a media query, at least right now in our current state, is the same. So it's nice to have something that's not going to change. And then inside of here, we rewrite our selector and we change content. So For example, if we're looking at this H1, we now know the H1's up here, right? International Airport. Margin bottom 20 at 515. So 515, I think, was just an arbitrary number that I think was being showcased. 500 is fine. But you can see if we don't have that margin bottom, like if it was back to the normal 0, you can see how it's smashed, right? So that's why we put the 20 pixels in. It's these tiny little adjustments that really set you apart and make your design shine on different devices. Okay. So why is max width important, by the way? Why do we even have something like max width? Compared to just a width. That's right, it sets constraints. And constraints are good because we as human beings can't consume content in massive widths, right? I mean, as an exercise, if you just took a web page that didn't have any constraints, like this one, and if we turned off the constraint, if we turned off the max width, we just commented it out, and we started to zoom out to maybe a bigger screen, this is already harder to read. This is harder to kind of consume, and then knowing there's all these different distractions around. So these are the kinds of things that actually begin why max width even is valuable, because it can prevent us from getting distracted as a user. This is called visual hierarchy in user experience, where your eye is trying to find the thing that makes most sense to look at. And so if we do that, we're just wrecking the user's experience. It's really hard to consume data. So constraints are extremely important. Okay, all those things being understood, we're basically trying to make a website accessible to everybody, whether they have a disability or not. Accessibility extends beyond. Accessibility goes into user experience. So when I say accessibility, I'm thinking as many people possible that can view or consume my website, I want to give them an opportunity to do so. Because I can't, as a developer that can see and hear and write, I've got to make sure that other people that might not have those advantages in life, that they still have the opportunity to consume my website. So that is accessibility, being able to provide as much usage to the biggest amount of group of people as possible, and ideally everybody if possible. So that does come with a cost, and it's usually more study and more time and being able to understand those things. For example, this website is okay right now, but the accessibility of it is not terrible either, but it's not great, because if I change the settings of my web page, like if I go into Google Chrome, for example, I go to settings and I change this. Where's my text at? There it is, font size. If I change this because I can't see very well, I'm hard of seeing, I need to update this to very large for my font. So watch what happens, by the way, to all these fonts. They get pretty big. And it's easier for me to see the website now. So now I'm going to go back to my airport website. It looks like everything got pretty big here. So if we go inside these content pieces and we inspect element, we will find that the P tag did not have any font size on it. So because the P tag didn't have any unit on it, it just got bigger with whatever the default font size is from the HTML. If we go to the HTML tag, well, we're inside CodePen, so got to go all the way up here. But you can see that there's a font size of 15px set by the HTML font size on everything else, but not in our content. So that's why none of these things changed up here. So interestingly enough, you can see that this content changed, but this content didn't change. Why not? Well, if we go look at the H1 when we styled it, look what we did. We hard-coded 20px in there. So this can be a good and a bad thing. Good in that it's constrained, bad in that the user has no control over the constraint. Like, no matter what I do as a user, if I change my settings, I still might not be able to read that because it's so small. And so what you want to do is provide usability to everybody without hampering their choices on their browser. Okay, so what does that look like for code? Well, it looks like responsive units. It looks like rems, ems, pixels, and let's talk about each. So one of the things I love to do first is actually just open up a tiny div, call it pixel, and just style that pixel, just so we can see what one pixel looks like. So width, 1px, height, 1px, and then we'll say background red, so we can kind of see it. It's a semicolon. Okay. Can you see it? it's right up there. So let me zoom in. Bom, 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 bom. Bom, bom. Can you see it? Right there. That is a pixel as portrayed by my resolution on my computer. My computer is currently operating on a 2K monitor. So it's basically doubly small in its pixel density and resolution, I should say. And so this is a tiny little pixel. Wow. I had to zoom in really far to see that. So now if I go back out to full screen, that's really hard to see. So let's make it a little bit easier to see by adding 10 pixels to the top or the height and width. You can see that 10 pixels still isn't a lot, right? So when I was working in ad agencies, the law we had to have for the smallest text we could have was 11 pixels. That was the lawful size. Otherwise, you could get fined. That's still pretty awful. Still pretty hard to see. And so these kinds of things are really frustrating as you start to learn about accessibility, like especially when it comes to terms and conditions or those kinds of things that you're not really understanding when you're trying to click something. So these little pixels have a big impact on our lives when it comes to accessibility and usability. So that being said, what do we do? Well, pixels are fine to use for a lot of things. They used to not be, and I'll tell you why. Because when we zoomed in on a browser, even a couple of years ago, we didn't have the ability to zoom in. So I'm going to hit Control plus and watch this box. It's going to get bigger. Well, not much bigger, I guess I should say. If I looked at the font, though, you can see that the font got bigger and easier to read. So pixels, as far as layout go, are maintaining their integrity. But if you look at this font, it's much bigger than the original purported font, right? I'd take off that crazy stuff we always do there. And if we go down to our font size, it says 20px. So what happened here? Well, the browser zoomed in and the code didn't change. So 20px is still 20px, but now we're zoomed in. Okay, so you're probably going, well, how does this all work together? I got to show you these things first so we can get to the meat of it all. So pixels are great for, again, if you want to have specific rigid layout, which sometimes you do, you want those constraints, use them. But when it comes to fonts, I never use pixels if I can help it because of how rigid they are. So let me show you what I would rather use. There's a thing called a rem, an M, and VHs and VWs. I forgot to get out this thing. Let me go grab this really quick. So if I go to collections, go to, where's my responsive web design? Good stuff here. I have it all ready. Is it these helpers? No. There it is. I like this one. So I'm going to fork this, and I'll give this to you. For Web 19. Save. Okay. Here's the link. Go ahead and follow me with this link. We're going to do some experimentation together. So coming out here, I want to talk about each one of these, and then we'll come back to our guided project and implement some of this stuff. So as you can see on the right, I've got this is a PX, this is an M, this is a REM, and then this is a VW. And they are all inside of a container with different classes that I've named pixel container, M, REM, just to keep it simple. Let's see, we will get back to this shortly. So I want to basically put everything at the same size. So the problem with that is, what is the default size of the browser? Well, if we were to look at the HTML on most browsers, at least all the browsers I know of, the default font size is 16px. Get rid of these comments so I don't wreck my code here. Okay. Not sure why those things were already in there. So in this case, the default font size, if I were to change this to 16px, this is what every browser has baked into it. Okay. And so if knowing that, if I wanted everything to be equal, I could say 16px for my H1, or if I deleted it, let's see what happens. Goes back up to another font size that I've got somewhere inside of here. So let's see where my PX container is, right there. Where are you getting your styles from? Oh, because I have an H1 and I don't have a reset on. That's why. So because I don't have a CSS reset on right now and taking everything back to its defaults, it's got its own style agent or user agent styles. So if we go look at this, you can see here they've got 2M going on from the user agent style sheet. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to knock this out really quick so it's zeroed out for everything. There we go. So this is PX. Let's go talk about what M is. So, but this did turn into 16px now finally. Well, let's go see. It should. Font size 16px. And if you delete it, or comment it out, I should say, yep, something weird's going on here. Oh, because what am I doing with my reset now? My goodness. Oh, it's because I changed my settings over here. Oh, I was going crazy. Let me change these back for a second. Whoa, I just hit like too many things I did not want to do. Oh my goodness. Okay. There we go. Man, I'm like wrecking my browser on accident with clicking. Okay, I was seriously going insane there. There we go. That should be 16. Let's see for sure. Oh, finally. So that's why we test our work, right? Because sometimes you forget you check the settings box. All right, so that's a good thing just to see that if we don't set it, it is defaulted to 16 unless you wreck your browser settings while you're teaching. So in this case, with an M container, what is 1M? Well, 1M is going to look to its parent container. And if its parent container doesn't have it, it's going to look further. So watch over here with this M. What is 1M equivalent to? 16px. It tries to match its parent's value. So that's why I wanted to reset everything to 0. So in this case, 1M is looking to its parent first. So it's going to look up here, and it's going to say, hey, what are you? I want 1M is going to be whatever your value is, in pixels, by the way, which is funny, because if you go look at this thing, it's still 16, right? And so it's just trying to emulate whatever it got inherited from. So M's became very popular when responsive design started to evolve into what it is today. M's were used by everybody. I use them all the time. The problem is whenever you're working with a base of 16, that math sucks. So we often have to do a PX to M conversion because I'm just not a math whiz with 16. And so you have to go in here, and I'd usually have this open. If you were working with like 2 or 3 font sizes, you could memorize the 2 or 3 font sizes. But otherwise, it was really frustrating. So if I wanted to figure out what 20 pixels was from the designer, I had to convert it into an M. It'd be 1.250 M. You see how that could be really maddening? just like trying to do that math without having to jump to a calculator, for example. So M's were amazing because they allowed us to be percent based, but they were awful because, as you can see over here, they've got a percent value. So that's a big portion I don't want you to miss here. So it converts from, what were we doing, 20 to 1.250 to 125%. And if you're using points, which most people don't use, but if you are using them, it converts to 15. So this thing was, I basically lived and died on this tool if I was using different font sizes. That was pretty frustrating though. As a developer, having to figure out what your parent element's font size was, and what if that was an M's? So what if this thing wasn't an M font size? 2M, or what if it was 1.25M? Then this would adjust based on the M's container size. And so you would have to do all sorts of math to try to figure out what's going on. Notice that I'm changing the container. I'm not changing the H1 anymore. I'm changing the container. So that's really hard and frustrating when you're basically like a double sliding scale. If one slides, then this one's got to slide too. So you can see how maddening M's can be as a developer. So I don't use M's anymore. It's something I don't have to worry about, and I'll tell you why. Because of our friend, the rem. So a rem, if I were to say what one rem is, and, oh, sorry, that's the container. Let me go to the actual one. The rem, look at that. One rem goes to 16. Well, notice something here. We've got a container around this, right? Well, M's behavior looks at the container. So let me change this thing to like 30px. Nothing changes. So notice that the rem is not concerned with its parent. It's looking somewhere else. So rem stands for root M. Root M. And root is going to be the HTML selector. So in this case, it's only looking at one selector instead of its parent. So that's nice because there's one source of truth there, and we don't have to worry about the millions of cascading end that could occur. I say millions, but literally hundreds if you're working on a fully emmed project. So watch this. If I change the font size to 40px, all these things updated because M is looking at its parent, and right now M doesn't have anything inside of its parent. So let's get some differentiation here. Font size, let's take this down to 10px. So M just got knocked out of the race, but Pixel's still in the race, Rem is still in the race. So the interesting thing is Pixel's still looking at the font size from HTML, and so is Rem, but here's the difference between the two. I can change the pixel directly on my container, right? So I actually haven't set a style here. So if I say font size, and let's just say 20px, I've now overwritten the HTML. So now rem is the last thing standing that's still looking at the HTML. VW is totally different. It's looking at the viewport, so however wide I get, it gets smaller or little, so that's a weird one we'll get to in a second. But rem is the only one that's staying consistent with this font size. So why am I focusing on this so much? Well, because when we set our settings in our browser, if we don't have a hard-coded width here, so let me get rid of this hard-coded width for a second. And you can see this is rem goes back to 16, right? So watch this. This is the magic we've all been waiting for. So as we come back to the font size, and I change this to very large again, I come back to my code, and look, rem got bigger. So rem adjusted to my user settings in my browser. We now have a unit that can actually adjust to the settings of the browser, and that's really powerful. Now, if everything was rem, or sorry, if everything was M, gosh, In this case, what is 1M on the container? Well, it's 10px. What if this was an M? What if this was 2M? Well, then, of course, it would also look at the browser. So M and REM both cascade back up as far as they can until they hit a value, except REM only stares at the HTML thing. So here's the problem. What if you wanted to say font size 45px? Well, now it doesn't matter. So watch this one. If I come down here and I say medium, nothing changed. So if we actually set a font size here, it wrecks the responsiveness. It wrecks the accessibility. So if we use a %, which is a valid value for fonts, of 62.5%, this is an interesting number. So 62.5% basically takes the power of 16. So font size 16px is what is the default of the browser. And then it goes up on those powers based on the setting of whatever the user sets. So very large, very small, they're all using that base. So if we come back over here, if we can get rid of this instead of being hard-coded and turn it into a %, we win. The problem is 16px is still a pain in the butt to convert, right? Like, it's super obnoxious. But what if our base was 10? What if we could just go off of 10? Well, if I try to convert 20, it's going to be 2. If I try to convert 16, it's going to go 1.6. Like, we can do tens. We can do multiplications of tens as developers. At least most of us can. So if I do like 23, what's 23 going to convert into? What is that going to be in a RAM on a base of 10? It's 2.3. That's right. So easy, right? We don't have these crazy decimal numbers and everything. So with all of these things in mind, 62.5% will actually equate. So what it is just taking 16 pixels and putting it down to a base of 10px. So this no longer is hard-coded, and we have a font size of 62.5%. Well, 62.5% of 16px is going to be 10 pixels as a base. So that means 1 rem is equivalent to what? What does 1 rem equal in this scenario here? 10px. Good job. I wouldn't fault you for saying 16 because we've been talking about it so much. So 1 rem is 10. Aha. So if I wanted 20 pixels, 2 rems, 3 rems, 4 rems, 5 rems is 50, and it's responsive. So if I go to my settings over here, and I change this to very large, I come back, guess what? It's stuck around. Isn't that cool? See how big this is? Come back, take it down to very small, come back, and it readjusts to the user settings. So REMs, based on this little conversion here, can be some of the most accessible units on the internet. And most sites that want to be accessible are using REMs. So let's go see an example, non-example of how these things are used in the wild. So ESPN.com, highly trafficked website. You would think they would want as many people to see their website as possible. And they do. They want to make a ton of money. So we'll go to a random article here, and you can see all this information, right? Now, what if you were hard of seeing and you wanted to zoom in? Well, we could zoom in by using our zoom, right? And notice what's happening here. All of these font sizes are getting bigger. And even notice that the mobile navigation's popped in. I mean, if I was hard of seeing, this would be a good experience if I zoomed in. The problem is, because I'm zooming in, I've had to readjust how my whole browser looks at everything. And it's kind of annoying. I have to change the zoom per page I go to. It sucks. So what if instead I wanted to have my font size very large as the default? So let's do that. Go back here, and nothing has changed. So in this case, if I were to go look at the content that's being written here, you can see the font size is hard-coded pixels. So you can tell the developer probably did this because they're like, if people want to read this stuff, they can zoom in. But you can see how crappy that is for somebody that doesn't have the ability to see smaller fonts like this. So it sucks because you're operating on this premise that you want your text to be very large like this, and then you go to the website and it's unreadable. Okay, so how does this look in a site that's actually doing it? Well, let's go to a government website that's forced to do these things. So inside the White House here, let's inspect their code. And you can see here, they've got font sizes in rems. Looks like they're not doing that fun conversion. That's okay. But 1.125 rem is going to be used in a responsive way so I can change my settings. So pay attention to this layout. In fact, let me draw a box just in case we're not seeing the before and after. So this was the original sizing of where our content was. So I'll use this as a way to gauge how much it grew. So we'll come back over here, change it to very large, go back to the White House page, and you can see everything's literally changed. So if we come down here, all the font got bigger, like everything got way bigger, right? Like way bigger in a way that's way easier to read. Isn't that crazy? Now the user that has their settings can consume the website way easier, and it's adjusted to their browser so they don't have to zoom. Like I'm zoomed at 100% right now. So this is ideal. This is something that we want to have in our code so that when people consume our content, they can use their settings. So again, if we turn this off or make it even very small to see the opposite effect, you can see it gets crazy small, right? Because we're using those responsive units. Versus ESPN, nothing changes. So it's hard because I feel like ESPN should have this, you know, if they want to be accessible to people in their settings. But they've obviously made a business decision to not be like that. And they're using those hard-coded pixels because they probably believe, hey, look, if people just zoom, they'll get a great experience. But you can see the annoyance there, right? If you're struggling to see these things. Okay, so what do we do as developers? We want to accommodate the most amount of people. And by doing that, we can use the font size. So what is that font size? What was that thing? What was the magic number? 62.5%. And what does that number come from? Why do we use that weird number? That's right. It's 16 pixels translated 62.5% into 10. Gustavo, thank you for putting the whole thing out there. So 10 divided by 16 multiplied by 100, 62.5%. Let's put that in there just so everybody isn't confused. So 10 divided into 16. Why am I writing this when it's already been written? There we go. So now this allows us to operate in a power of 10. So notice something that happened in our code. Notice that this font got really tiny, right? I'm on medium. So why did it get really tiny? Why is this so tiny? What's going on here? Yes, Brandon. It's 1 rem, which is how big right now? 10 px. Good job, Amanda. That's right. So in this case, this is 10 pixels. So this is showing us that we've got to make sure that our p tag has some font size on it. So if we went into here, it'd be wise of us to set a font size of whatever we want. Let's say 1.8 rem. What is 1.8 rem? 18 pixels, and nobody had to bust a calculator out for that. Do you see how beautiful that is? Otherwise, we would have to bust a calculator out. So if we came over here, if it was a power of 16, if we wanted to get 18, got to hit the convert button. It's 1.125 rem. That sucks. Or M, I should say. Or rem if you're not using the power, by the way. So having this little trick up here is so helpful as a developer and helps you just code faster because you don't have to go think about conversions or memorize random 1.125 rem. Okay, let's take a 30-minute break. Let's take a 5-minute break. We've gone beyond 30 minutes. When we come back, we will continue to deep dive into this fun stuff. 30 rem break. Oh man, coding. It's on the mind. Step away from the Oops, didn't hear the beeper go off. Sorry if that was sitting there for a minute or two. Usually there's a beep. Okay, let's go back to our code here. And look at more of how we can start going through our web page here. So what I want you to do is I want you to look through this code. Man, I'm coughing today. I want you to think about where can we change the font sizes to rems. So I want you to think about this. There's not very many places, so I'm not going to spend 10 minutes looking at it with you. But let's go through each portion really quick and just see where we can make a change. So if we look at International Airport, it's an H1, and look, we've got a 20px. So that means we're not being very accessible right now, and we've got to change that into a more accessible unit. So if we go to our H1, there it is. So what is 20px converted into what we're trying to get done here with our rems? Let's see, oh, I'm in the wrong channel. Dang it. There we are. That's right, 2 rem because of the base of 10. So we can say 2 rem. Watch what happens. Nothing. That's a great sign. That means that everything's working great. So now let's go to our A tags. Inspect these. Find out what we've got here. So we've got a hard-coded pixel of 18. So what's 18 converted? I want this to be so annoying that you just know it. Yes, 1.8. Exactly. Perfect. All right, then we'll go to our headers here, take a peek at these, and all of the font sizes are getting changed here across the board. 20px converts into 2 rem, like we've been saying. So it's probably overkill if we've got the same font size on our H1, right? So it's something we should probably look at changing. So if we go down to our H1, and if the font size is matching all the other ones, it's overkill. But we probably want this to be a little bit bigger, honestly, because it's an H1, right? So that's something we should consider. Or if we wanted it to be 25 pixels, 2.5 rem is fine. So those are the kind of things that we can mess around with, getting our visual hierarchy in place. We already did the paragraph to 1.8. This is where people might start saying, like, well, how big is too big? I think 1.8 is like as big as I like to get as far as default medium settings go. It also depends, of course, on your designer. So what is your designer designing for? What are the constraints? What have they been told to do? And then if we come down to the buttons, let's go see if we've got anything to worry about there. So inside of our buttons, yes, we do. We've got a hard-coded pixel. Looks like 20 is the font size of the day. So if we come down here, where's our button? There it is. Font size 20. Let's change this to 1.8 rem for 18. And of course, we've got the other button as well. Font size 25. We'll do 1.8 as well. Notice that we got a hard-coded font size here. So we've got to change this out to 2 rem as well on mobile. And now we're looking good up. 2.5 needs to happen here. By the way, we're converting something old, right? If you're writing this from scratch, you're not doing this. You're just writing in rems from the beginning. So I just want to go through this project, though, and say, look, after all these things are in, oh, we still got the bottom navigation because we use a different selector for that. So this is actually a good lesson on specificity, right? So if we go look at our A tag, we're in header nav A. Notice these A tags didn't get the same treatment, right? So we could do 2 things. We could just say all navigation items, like just navs in general, should have a font size. Or if we wanted to have a different font size in our footer, sorry, my scroll's going crazy right now. So here's main footer nav. We can pop this in, and it'll cascade down to there. And of course, we could change that if we want to. All right, so now every text value that we've got inside of our guided project trailhead save is now going to be responsive to the user settings. So let's see what happens. Come in here, change it to very large, go back, and now we've got a new interesting problem. So in this case, international airport, navigation, this one's okay, I guess, but over here, navigation got kind of bonked. Come down here, and this stuff's easier to read though. So now you can see the conundrum of trying to be accessible when you want to look good, right? When you want your design to look good. So does anybody have any ideas on how we could deal with this? Any ideas? So max width, media queries, layouts, percent-based layouts. Let's go look at like what's going on here. So we've got a navigation that's got a hard-coded margin left 62 pixels. That's a problem. So now you can see how hard-coded items directly fight with percent-based items. So when you start going with a percent-based layout, like going all in, you've really got to go all in, or you're going to start getting stuff like this where pixels start to fight with rems in this case. It's not very fluid. So we can get rid of the margin left. And in this case, we're looking better. But what's going on here? Our H1 is still taking up some space because our font size is 2.5 rem, right? So we start having to look at white space in our layout. We have to start thinking, is our website big enough to handle responsiveness? So in this case, I'm forcing us to live in a tiny little space. Like 600 pixels is not realistic for a website, right? So if we were living in a real website, it'd look like this. At least 1100 pixels is pretty normal. And so that's much more obtainable, right? Because we have more room to breathe. But as we start thinking about going down into our breakpoints, it looks good here at our breakpoint, right? So that's good. So that'll look good on a phone. But this is where it gets tricky right here as a developer. This is when, if you're being fully accessible and trying to think about every use case, these are the kind of things that we can start using media queries to adjust for. And yes, it's okay if we want to drop the font size down a little bit, or if we want to increase white space, or if we jump into this layout a little bit earlier. So again, this is going to be a decision made by the big boss and the marketing team and trying to figure this out. However, if we take it down to medium, bring it back over here, you can see we don't have any problems until we get there. So there's still a problem even on medium, which is a good indicator that there's something wrong. So remember that margin left that we had in there. Let's get rid of that first. Where did I put that? It's on my navigation. What am I doing? I'm just scrolling. There it is. Margin left. So getting rid of that hard-coded pixel number 1 is going to be one of the best decisions I can make. Like I don't even need to have anything in there if I don't want to. And then in header nav, it doesn't matter because it's still there on margin left, getting 0. So now you can see that I've already eliminated a lot of my problems right there. However, if I bring my font size up again, I have to keep hitting that. We're going to come back to it though. Zoop. So in this scenario, we probably should be using a media query to make sure our navigation is accessible, because right now this is pretty rough to consume. So then we can use a media query to bump in and figure out where does it actually start to get wrecked. Right about there. And that is 690 pixels. So what we can do is we can go into our navigation system. We can pop in a media query. And we can either make our H1 not as giant, right? We have a couple options. So we could come into our H1 and we could say add 600 pixels or 690 pixels, header H1. Font size. Then we could drop this to 2 rem and see how that impacts us. So as we go down, see how the H1 gets smaller. before it hits the mobile. So there's still some room there. But see, this right here, this is the worst. This is the worst part of development, is this tiny little gray area before you're hitting that, and you're going, okay, are users actually hitting this resolution? Are they actually using this resolution when they come to our page? And the beautiful thing is, you can use your analytics to go through here and say, okay, at this resolution, in this case, it's 500 and something. You can say, is it worth getting this 500 and something based on our user amount? And the answer is, because we're inside of here and we're already at very large, we go down to medium, come back and look at it. Oh my gosh, I keep jumping around. We're looking good here in general. So then it's just like, okay, you've got to make a big boss decision at that point. And so that's where it all comes down to your team, your marketing team, thinking about accessibility. How many people can view your content? Can they still consume it? In the perfect world, it's still hard. Like even at the White House, like if you look at the navigation system up here and we change it to very large, watch what happens. Even their navigation system gets bumped out of line here. So, well, they've actually changed it since I last taught this. But there was, basically their navigation changes with how many content pieces they have in here. And so sometimes it bleeds over even in those cases. So you were right. Some of you were saying flex wrap. That's exactly right. Like you start thinking about wrapping sooner. Okay. I told you we would deep dive on this stuff. You're probably a little overwhelmed with like how much detail goes into some of these things. And I just want to say, step by step, we'll get there. It's one little thing, media query here, responsive unit there. We'll get better and better as we start programming. So don't be overwhelmed by like this not looking perfect. Understand like, oh, this works because of media queries. We're trying to be more accessible to as many people as we can. At the same time, we want to have responsive units for users, browsers. We still need constraints. We still need to stop things from growing. So that's why we have this at 600 in our little example here. And all these things work together to create that fluid website. But I think a lot of people don't take into consideration the user's experience and their settings. And that's what I really want to open your eyes to today. It's just like, whoa, there's a lot more out there than just your browser and your thoughts. Okay, let me go answer. I haven't gone to the questions thread. I apologize for that. So let's go over here. All right, I'm going to go to the most recent and we'll work our way down. Is the issues in the nav when you go down to a tablet and mobile, wouldn't you want to start going to a hamburger side menu? That is a hotly debated thing right now because sometimes hamburger menus are totally inaccessible based on how they're implemented. So sometimes people turn off their JavaScript. If you're turning off your JavaScript, you're asking for a world of pain. I kind of hate that argument. The purists will bring it up though. Like if you turn off JavaScript, does your website still do its job? That makes JavaScript developers like, whoa, you just turned off my career, you know? Like it's crazy. And so that is like the ultimate argument that a lot of people will die on for accessibility is like, does it work if everything's off? And it's like, oh, geez, that's a tough conversation. People do have those fights and they do have those arguments. But in that case, if we're living in a world where we know people have JavaScript turned on, yeah, you could totally use a hamburger menu. But people, not everybody understands what those are still. People sometimes still don't understand those. So hamburger menu is the 3-line menu that we saw right here. So if we zoom in, this is a hamburger menu. Looks like a hamburger. So that's why people call it that. And then the 3 dots, I don't know if you can see up here, but the 3 dots, that's called a hot dog menu. So hot dogs and hamburgers is what we say in jest to reference those 2 types of menu systems. But yeah, you could use that. Can you set every element in rem or just font size? Ooh, great question. The answer is you can set every element. So if we set every element, including the box model, and width and everything to a rem, it would be valid code. And a lot of people like to do this. And I prefer to do it at least with a base of 10, because otherwise it gets really crazy. But being able to have these widths, I prefer to use percents personally, instead of going off of a user's font size, because I still want to maintain my structure. However, if you bump the structure over, so if we were to go to, for example, like with images, I want them to be percent based. I don't want them to be rem based for my percents. But if I come down to like this margin right here on the header, so 20px very easily converts to 2 rem, right? And padding converts to 2 rem on my header. And watch what happens when I change this out. So it comes over and it actually bumps everything down on my header piece. So there's more white space up here. And so those are things you have to consider. It's like, do you want to use a rem or do you want to use a pixel? And a lot of people are using M's or rems now for box model than they're using pixels. But you'll still see a combination of both. So like if we go back to the White House, inspect this element, let's go see what they're doing. So they're using rems for font size, and this is like a font way. Okay, so let's get a piece here. Position relative, they're using percents for their widths. Go to here, margin top. So I want to talk about, I mean, they're using all the things, right? So in this case, when they're using top, they're using pixels. When they're using bottom, they're using pixels. But when you see left and right being used, let's see if we can get a left and right somewhere in here. Oh, there's some, I saw something flash over here. Right, that's bottom, there's top. Okay, there's some left and right. So they're hard coding their pixels right here. But are they using display flex? Nope, they're displaying block. And they're using their margin. Let's see what they're using for their margin. 0 auto. So they're just centering this page right here. Let's see how it looks when we get on the phone. Yep, everything stacks up. So as you can see, I'm using the White House as a great example of accessibility because it's a government website. But in reality, you can use rems for everything if you wanted. But you could see the disadvantage is someone could totally change your whole layout by changing their font size. For me, I've used all sorts of combinations. It just depends again on who you're working with. So for pixels, for fonts, I should say, you want to use rems. For left and right, here, let me write down my opinion. This is my opinion, so it's not gospel. Fonts, rem. Box model. So left and right, use percent or rem, depending on what you want. Top and bottom, I'm using pixels because I don't like messing around with responsive units for top and bottom. It's never a good idea. So box model, by the way, considers everything, width, height, everything. If you're going to go full screen, that's where we're going to use VHs and VWs. And we'll talk about that right now. So that is my, if you were working with me, this is how I like to work. Doesn't mean it's the right thing, but I found it to be very effective for the most amount of browsers and devices. So VHs and VWs, we didn't get to yet because we've got to go down here. They are directly related to the viewport. So what is the viewport? Well, we should know now, based on yesterday's viewport meta tag, the viewport is the viewable area on the screen, right? And so the viewport changes, the font changes. This is very volatile because if the viewport's changing all the time, your fonts are going to be crazy. So if I come in here and I do like Well, 1.6 is really hard to see. Let's do 4.6 just so you can see this thing grow and shrink. So VW is the viewport width. So as I change the width to get bigger, the font gets bigger. As I change it to get smaller, it gets smaller. Do you see a problem with this though? As viewport widths get smaller, they're not responsive to any user setting, right? So depending on the user setting, this thing is not going to be adjusting. Now, if I come back here and make this medium again, oh gosh, nothing changed. So they're actually not very responsive to the user. They're only responsive to the viewport, which does not make them, in my opinion, very accessible right now. So when are VHs and VWs really valuable? Well, I love them when I need to go full screen on something. Going full screen on a height or a width with these other units can be a pain in the butt. But VHs and VWs are amazing for this. And it's all out of 100, by the way. So 100 VW is going to go as max as the page can go. Now, it seems ridiculous here because it's a font, and it is ridiculous. But if we were using VH and VW, and VH, by the way, is just the height, right? So based on the height of the browser, the font will change. So when are they valuable? Full screen, like modals, trying to do like a big canvas layout in the background. To me, that's when they're the most valuable. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I come over here and I've got a container, like I'll just make a new div over here that's containing everything. So I'm going to say div full screen, just to give you some idea of what I'm going at here. So come down here and we'll do full screen. Did I do a dash? I did not do a dash. Whatever. This is where VHs and VWs are awesome. So if I said background gray, you can see it's not going full screen right now. And if I tried to do height, I did 100%, it's not going to work. This blows people's minds because it's like, wait, I said 100%. And this is saying, yeah, I'm 100% of what's my content. Like, that's the weirdest thing. So to get height to actually work like this with percents, you have to actually set body and HTML to height 100%. So stupid. This took me a long time to figure out. And so that's annoying. You'd have to, and that has to go for every div on the way up, by the way. So if it's nested in another div, it's got to be height 100%. So that's obnoxious. So what if instead we could just say 100 VH? That's freaking awesome. So I don't have to mess with any other units. VH just goes 100%. And of course, I could do width just in case as well. So width 100 VW. And now I know no matter how big or small I get, I'm going to be covered. This is where I love VHs and VWs. And you're going to have projects in your life that are going to require you to go full screen like this. They're the best units for that. But that's kind of like where I would stop. I don't use them for fonts. They're too volatile. They can go crazy big and crazy small. They don't adjust to user settings. And so that's why I prefer using REMs. Okay. Could VW be useful on the tagline innovation? I remember wishing it could be a little bit smaller. If it doesn't get too small or too big, like that's the problem, is it's like the Goldilocks problem. VHs and VWs have a hard time being in that perfect zone. So I would love for you to experiment with maybe fonts, but don't use VHs and VWs for layout right now. I've seen too many students like fall in love with the idea of a viewport, and they forget that VH, like if you readjust your height on a web page, nothing should change in your layout. You should just get a bigger scroll bar. If you use VHs, everything squishes and it looks awful. You start skewing your web page. So please don't use VHs and VWs for layout right now. How do you toggle the different screen sizes in Chrome? So you just go to the drop down up here. You just grab this little drop down here. So that's how you do it. So you've got to go to toggle device toolbar, Command Shift M on Mac, and Control Shift M should be on PC. Is Pixels just like the old and RAM and M are new that will slowly switch? Will Pixels be around for a while? Yes, Pixels will be around for a while because of their zoom ability, because you can zoom in like we did here. Like clearly they're around. It's 2019, and one of the biggest sports syndicates in the world is using Pixels. So if that's any indicator to you, I don't know what is. Like Pixels are still being used, but we saw very clearly that being more accessible is important. So would it be smart to prioritize learning REM instead of Pixels? Yes, for fonts. So 100%. In general, do we have to design around other user settings? User setting medium font size. So in general, you're operating on that premise. Like designers are operating on that premise as well. They're living in a medium world. It's the designers that know and think about accessibility that are very rare. And hopefully you can teach them, show them the difference. Is font size 6.2? No, 62.5. And if you're asking if it's legit, it is. It's not a trick. A lot of people use it. So far, REM sounds like the answer to accessibility. It is. It's definitely the answer right now if you're using a percent-based approach. If you're not using the percent-based approach, it's just as bad as the other ones. Can REMs be used for margins? Yes. What about if they adjust font size in Windows and Chrome? Like my 4K monitor has to be 300% zoom to look normal on Windows. How would that affect Chrome? So depending on your font size and your zoom, everything's going to change, right? So that is one of the hardest things about new tech. With a 4K monitor, for example, it's like you can't see anything, even if you have good vision. And so that's where we've kind of hit this interesting spot in technology lately, in humanity, where technology is like better than we need. Like a 4K monitor is better than we need, even though the marketing and the gaming industries and all that are like, oh, 4K is awesome. Really, 2K kind of was the prime. Yeah. Eric says he needs his 8K soon. Should we use only REMs when we have the rest of our website designed in a responsive manner? Again, I think it would be cool if you took a crack at using REMs at everything just to see how it looks and then adjust your font size and just see how crazy things get. But by doing that, you're going to see you wish certain things weren't in REM, and those certain things should just maintain with percents. So that's why I gave my opinion in the channel about box model left and right using percents. You can use REM, but that's just my opinion. What is the difference between VH, VW, VMin, VMax? So VH, VW we talked about being height and width. Min and max is how far things should go before they don't expand. It's just like max width and min width. So same concepts going on there. Just understand it's all about the viewport and not about the user settings. Okay, if you use the 62.5 trick with one REM font size, wouldn't that make your fonts appear smaller than most browsers? Wouldn't you need to scale up? Yeah, and it's simple. You just go to your HTML tag or you go to your body tag or whatever and just say 1.6 or whatever you want. So yes, there is some tooling there, of course. I think I'm glad that you're thinking about that, but don't get hung up on it. I read in this TK link, we should use M's for accessibility, but from lectures, REMs. So yeah, this thing right here, if you read all of it, there's a ton of opinion. I want you to read and get more opinion than just mine. Oftentimes people are giving their opinion about what are we doing at our job, and then they go write a blog post about it. We do it here at Lambda School too, right? Students will learn something, they'll go to Medium, they'll post a blog, we get like 1,000 claps, and people are just like, oh, this is the way it should be, but it's not true. There's so many opinions out there. There is not one right way. So that's why I want to give you dissenting opinions. I want to give you my opinion, and I want you to figure it out yourself. Big boss, right? Would it appropriate to keep standard units, AM, RAM, or PX, or mix for desired? I mix for desired results. Can we make a thread for student answers so the main chat doesn't get drowned out? Make a thread for student answers. Guess I'm not sure what that means. So when I ask you, that's the main thread. Like that's Web 19 Sprint 02. So I actually like the running conversation we have. Let's see. I mean, this is general channel, so it's, yeah, I mean, that's the purpose. Like Josh nailed it. Well, that was a total pun on my name. Did not think about that one. So this one right here, Web 19 Sprint 02, is meant to be a running dialogue. This isn't something where you need to like, you shouldn't be taking notes here. This is like us having a conversation in a classroom. So I think we're going to keep it, but I appreciate the feedback there. That's why we use this one, and we have the other one for project managers. How many fights have you gotten in your career with other developers? Every job you get in a fight with, you're bringing your opinion, somebody else is bringing their opinion, and that's where you've got to be able to communicate, not be a total jerk, and also be open. For example, if somebody came in and said, you're totally wrong, Josh, you should be using M's for everything, and this is why, I would listen. Like, I would be really open to what they have to say and try it out in a project. The problem is, if you don't have people that are like-minded like you, like willing to take other things and try different things, then you can start being really cantankerous and hate your job. And, you know, so it's really up to you and like what kind of mindset do you have. But I usually like get my rage out in my own projects. So if you're angry at somebody and you want to use REMs for everything, and I want to use VHs even though you told me not to, that's awesome. Go do that on a side project, but not on something that costs money. Do most companies use Bootstrap to make responsive? A lot of companies use Bootstrap, but they use it mostly for prototyping or getting a minimum viable product out as soon as possible. So Bootstrap is used a lot, at least in the way I've seen it and used it, is more about prototyping. Usually it's on an admin panel on the back end. Bootstrap's a great place. So you don't have to like build all these awful tables. Bootstrap is my preferred go-to for admin panels because it's so easy and already done. But outside of that, you could use massive, huge websites with Bootstrap. I love Bootstrap, but we don't teach it here anymore fully because you can Google everything and learn Bootstrap in an afternoon with all the information we've provided. From this morning's video, children must divide against the width container. Why can't it be smaller? Why must it divide? So the children must divide against the width container parent because that's how percents work. They look at the parent and they have to divide into that parent mathematically. Everything has to equal 100%. So I'm referencing the video that was in the material, but if you go back to the video, everything points back to it has to be 100%. So it doesn't have to be divided. If you're kind of combating my rule there, that's fine, as long as everything's under 100%. But to keep it simple, it's just easier to think about dividing into the parent, just so it's always 100%. So the answer really is 100%. Edwin, is there a way to organize your CSS so you don't get lost in the long list? Yes, we will talk about that over the next 2 days. So preprocessors really do the best job. If you're not using a preprocessor, again, BEM is my choice. BEM, Block Element Modifier. When I right-click on Google Maps website, I don't see the inspect tool. Let's find out. So they've got a listener on here that actually prevents you from doing that. But you can always go to your web developer tools, go into, where's my dev tools? Dev tools, and open it up that way as well. Use the inspector tool, and that's how you can get on there. So they're just basically controlling the full experience. So you've got to dig a little deeper with your dev tools. In CSS for recent project, I was able to reference using a grandparent and then grandchild, but skip the parent. Is this valid? Code worked? Yes, because of inheritance. So that's fine. This is a normal behavior in CSS. So just always look at the cascade and think, where did I come from? You don't have to have every single div in line. So that's just normal behavior. It's the cascade of the CSS. Okay. Let's take another 5-minute break. When we come back, we're going to talk about our project today. It's a big deal. It's a 5-minute timer. Take a break. All right. I love all this conversation we're having. We're definitely, man, I'm trying to think about 500 people in the classroom. Like, how does that work? I feel like we have 129 people right now, at least on this Zoom call. I'm seeing basically like 10 to 20 people on average. It's the same 10 to 20 people that are commenting. Where are the other 100? And it's like, well, sometimes you're just like, I'll let the other 100 people chat, right? So what an interesting problem. It's a good problem. We're trying to figure out how it has it. So yeah, I'm with you, Tristan, saying a lot of us are listeners. But I want this to be, very constructive. I want to be able to say, hey, tell me what's going on here. What's 20 rem? And I want to see you guys are paying attention, So those kind of things are great for me to see where we are in engagement point. But man, it's interesting. It's interesting to see how we continue to progress here. Okay. The good questions, Greg, should be inside of here. Like, this is where the good questions should be, right? Emmett, I disagree, actually. I want to talk about. Emmett says, kind of pointless to say something that's being said 20 times. I don't actually agree with that, because sometimes those questions are 20 bad answers, right? And so being able to see where your mind is actually gives me an opportunity to see like where you are and like, have we got the point across? So if I see 20 bad answers, I'm going, uh-oh, that didn't go across correctly. So I just want to point that out. Like, yes, sometimes annoying to see 20 rem, 20 rem, 20 rem, right? But if I see those 10, 20 rems in a row, I know you're getting it. Versus if I see half of you saying 16 px and half of you saying 20 or 10 px, I know there's an issue. So anyway, those are my thoughts on it. Here's one little question I can answer. In general, I tend to use the CSS class only as a reference as much as possible rather than grandparent, parent, child. I'll just use .child. Bad habit? Not a bad habit. The more specific we can get with classes, the better. The less of a chain we create, the better. Because CSS is read from right to left from selectors. So the longer the selector chain, the more it's got to consume. Are we going to be using learn Sass and less? Yes, tomorrow. Okay, let's talk about this. So we've been able to describe accessibility. We know what the concepts are. Accessibility is way, way bigger than I just talked about. That was just one little thing to open your mind to the concept of accessibility. Describe and use responsive units to create a fully responsive website. So we talked about using rems, ems, pixels, percents. We talked about we did some conversion on our guided project to show those differences. And then building a percent-based layout. We kind of talked about this yesterday. Objectively, I just want you to understand that everything needs to be equal to 100% if we're using flex wrap, for example. If we're using display block or something, it for sure needs to be 100%. Or everything's going to start wrapping over the edge, right? So if we come down here, we've got all this stuff using flexbox and percent-based layouts. Notice there's no horizontal scroll bar. Like, this is a percent-based layout at this point because it's going off of the percentage of the viewport, right? And so that's why I like to use percents on the left and right margins to control that gutter and make sure it always looks a certain way. So for example, I might not use a rem here because I want this gutter to always look the same, but I might want the font size to get much bigger. So that's a good example of like when you would want to mix units there. This stuff comes in time, practice, seeing more of it in the wild. And I want to show you something that you're going to be working on today. So this is going to be your project for today. I'm going to have you build a portfolio web page and host it. That's right. We're going to get this thing up so other people can see it today. It's a lot easier than you think. don't let the intimidation factor hurt you, because you'll see how easy it can be. So everything's stemming from our project here for portfolio web page. Here's the README file. So build a portfolio website. So I want you to take all the projects that we've done so far: Sweetie Bakery, great idea, your sprint challenge, your responsive version of the great idea. And then this is the beginning of like how we can start adding even more projects to this in the future. For example, we're going to be working on a resume tomorrow. We're also going to be building a single page marketing web page called the Fun Bus on Thursday. So you're going to be able to add these projects as you start getting them and start building a portfolio by the time you get out of here. You're going to have a lot of stuff to show. So here's how this works. First off, I've made a full walkthrough video of how this whole thing works, from GitHub to the whole thing, like getting this thing down. So watch this video after lunch. This is going to help you walk through everything. So you're going to go through your normal GitHub branching setup. You're going to follow these steps. So navigate here. So html5up.net. This is an amazing template website. And I'm putting you in a template today because this is way more real life. So what I mean by that is you're going to come into a new code base and in a new job, and they're going to say, here's your first task, make this thing different, or add this new feature that already exists or that doesn't already exist inside of our code base. Never have I seen a junior developer come into a project and they're like, here we go, here's a million things that you can do, and nobody's going to tell you what to do. You get to start from scratch. It just doesn't happen. If it does happen, I mean, that usually means you're the only developer or they don't care. So in this case, here are all these projects basically that somebody has already built. I want you to go in and update these projects with your content. These are absolutely free. The only thing is you need to provide attribution. So what is attribution? It's letting the person know that it's not your design and it belongs to somebody else. So down here, you see how it says HTML5 up is the design? So that's how you provide attribution. It's built into every web page. So it says design, HTML5 up, giving attribution back to the creator. That is one valid way to do it. If you like the website so much and you actually think you're going to be using it for a very long time, I think this is a great beginner portfolio. Like, this is amazing, and I don't see why you wouldn't just keep adding to this and upgrading to it. But just in case you don't like it or you have your own, that's fine. I'm not going to force you to use this for your personal website. You can keep yours, but I bet you this one's better than yours because it's fully responsive. So let me tell you and show you what I mean. Like, let's go look at Story for a second. So here's desktop. It's just beautiful animations. Everything already works. Go to tablet portrait, mobile. It's just perfect from the beginning. So you've got to go in here. You've got to add your content to these pieces and start showing your skills. Like, you've got skills, HTML and CSS skills. Don't worry about the JavaScript right now. And in fact, the CSS is more of a study than a build today. So the thing that you're going to be building is just like getting it in the right spot, swapping out the HTML content to match like your name, for example. So if I was doing it for myself, I would change Story to Josh Knell. Like, this is my portfolio. And then I'd write a little blurb about myself, like, I love programming websites, blah, blah, blah. Like, sometimes this stuff's really hard to write because you've never had to write it for yourself. Think about the person that's trying to hire you. Think about that first impression that you're trying to leave. And so in this case, I would probably have an image up here that's either representative of where I live or something I'm passionate about, something that's going to grab attention. All those things can be found on free image websites like Unsplash and Pexels. So Unsplash is royalty free. You can go in here. So I live in Utah, so I could type Utah, and I could pick up, you know, a beautiful image from somebody that there's just so many images I could take. So in this case, I could put this up next to my name and be representative of Utah. So that's an example of something you can do. Or like, I love technology. So I go look up a technology. I could put up something really cool like this, some code, the Matrix, VR, whatever. Like, don't go crazy overthinking this. I want you just to start thinking about, how can I put these things in action? So we come in here and we can start injecting these things into our own story. In this case, it's literally called story. Come down here and guess what? You've got this awesome little blurb set up where you can hit this link and that should go to your GitHub repo. Isn't that awesome? Like, we could just go right to your projects. Like, this is a legit portfolio piece that would normally, I mean, there's no way that you could come up with this on your own right now with your skill set, unless you've got a ton of design background and you've already got a bunch of code under your belt. Having this on week 2 is so good. So we come down here, and I want you to notice that there's even JavaScript pieces. Ignore these for now, unless you want to deep dive on them and start and kind of take a look at the code. But I'm not going to actually require you to go through here and fill in every freaking thing. It's overwhelming. Like, this is a template. So I would say delete all this crap. Delete all this stuff. This is just giving you an idea of how things could look, or use it depending on where you want. Okay? So use this as a story. Okay. So any questions about my expectations for you as far as using this template? Again, the video walkthrough goes through every detail. So if you've got detail questions, my answer is going to be watch the video. But the general overview of what I want you to accomplish today is this. And you might be going, wait, where does the rem, pixels, m come into play here? Well, all of these things have units on them. And I want you to study the code base and see what they're using. So you can see in this case, they're using rem for the p tag for the box model. So top right, bottom left, right? So they're using 2 rem for the bottom there. And they're using 1.25 rem on that piece for the font size. In fact, let's go see what that looks like when we go update this to our larger font size. So like very large. Go back to our story page. Where did it go? Looks like it didn't update that much. Let's go see the HTML tag. No, there's nothing on here. It's inherit. That's correct. Let's see here. Let me bring this over here. Change it again. The code did get a little bit smaller, but I don't know. Let's go very small. It's usually easier to see that. Looks like it's not actually changing based on the font size. Wonder what's going on there. So this is something to stick into because they're using padding and everything for rem. Let's see. Well, I'm not going to poke around here for hours, but that's what I would be doing with you this afternoon, is trying to decide what's going on here. How does this thing work? If it's not based off of that, it's based off of something else. But think about all of the units that are going into this. So when you download this thing, let me show you a little bit of what it looks like to download it. I'll show you in a second. Let me get my VS Code down. So you hit the download button. This is all in the video, by the way. You can pay $19 if you don't want to do attribution or you want to support the person that gave it to you. So in this case, if you want to support AJLKN, you can go follow them on Twitter and maybe tweet at them if you're in the Twitterverse, and just say, hey, thank you for the template. It's awesome. Like, that'd be a huge deal to help that person get more notoriety. Go pay the $19 on Pixelarity just to benefit that person if you'd like to. But again, this is all free. So I downloaded it. You just got to make sure attribution occurs. I'm going to show you the demo. There it is. This is the demo that came. So this is what it looks like when you open it from your computer. Notice the images are gone, right? And that's because they were using images from Unsplash. And so they're not their licensed images, right? You just, hey, look, this is your template. You need to create it. So what I would do then is I would take the template file system, and I'll show you my VS Code of this. This is all in the video, so I'm going pretty fast here because I want to cover as much as I can in 15 minutes here. So index.html, notice the demo is the original demo, like if you wanted to see what it looked like before. HTML is your code. So first off, you got to change the title to say, you know, Josh Knell. You don't need to say portfolio if you don't want to, but I'm just going to do it here. And then you need to start studying the code. Like, look how much code is in here. There's so much code. There's 356 lines of HTML. If we go to the assets folder and we open up the CSS and we open up main.css, there are 8,578 lines of code. Just to give you an idea of what real CSS looks like when you're not inside of a code pen hanging out with an instructor on beginner level stuff. Like, this is cool stuff. This is big time stuff. But look at the top. This isn't that scary. This looks like a reset, right? Here's a media query. You know what that looks like. Here's box sizing. Here's the exact same line we use. Like, there's all sorts of things that should be familiar in here. There's just a lot of it. And so what I want you to do is just look through this code. And just, I'm not telling you look through 8,000 lines of code. I'm saying kind of do what I'm doing. Just go through and just kind of look at it and go, man, what are they doing here? Like, what is going on here with this stuff? What is this? Like, what is this transition? Like, try to pick out things and learn from somebody else's code, because this is more realistic to what it's going to feel like when you jump into somebody else's code at a job versus all the stuff we've been doing is, you know, fundamental. We're trying to build our fundamentals, and this is the first time that we're going to get a fundamental look at somebody else's code base without the pressure of like, this is due tomorrow. Like, this portfolio is going to grow over months of time. So if we go into our SAS folder here, we'll talk about more about preprocessors tomorrow. Totally ignore this folder right now. Just, you could even delete it. It doesn't matter. The CSS folder is the only thing we're going to stare at and work on. In fact, you don't have to change any of the CSS if you don't want to, but I want you to study it. It's all part of the requirements of today's assignment. So if I come in here, go back to the top of the page, let me change this H1 to say, you know, Josh Knell. And then what I'm going to do is I'll go get one of those images that I had from Unsplash. So I'll grab that technology image. I'll download it. You can't see what I'm doing. Just bear with me. So I'm going to call it tech JPG. I'm going to bring it into my code pen here. Let's see, where are you, code pen? Or sorry, VS Code. Tech JPG. There it is. Okay. So now what I did is I just downloaded the image, and it's called Tech JPG. I got this from Unsplash. So I'm going to go in here. I've got to read this code. I've got to figure out, where does my image go? Well, there's images banner.jpg. Seems like that might be a good place to go. So let me pop this in and say tech. Of course, I want to use the alt tag to describe what's going on. I'll say, you know, an image of a, looks like it's a server room. I don't know. I haven't looked at it really well. So we come in here. I'm going to go back to my page. It's really hard to do this without sharing my full screen. So again, the video I share has the full screen in it. So I'm going to refresh this page. It should say Josh Knell, and hopefully an image pops up here. Oh, I'm in the demo. I need to be in the HTML file. Sweet. So now you can see how this has already been customized to me very quickly by taking my Unsplash image right there, popping it into my code, swapping out Josh Knell. All of a sudden, I've just transformed the website in just 2 lines of code. You can do this. You can copy and paste. You have the skills of the HTML and CSS. And this is going to help you start building confidence and have a portfolio that's fully responsive. So if I take this down, I grabbed this. Look at that. I mean, it's beautiful no matter what I put it on. And of course, remember the zoom feature does matter here. So this is going to be 100% of what an iPad would look like. Looks really good. I didn't do much, right? I knew enough HTML and CSS to be deadly. And that's what I'm hoping you can be today. So I'm not going to tell you how far you need to go or how little you need to do. I have told you specifically to change the title, swap in images, and bring in a couple projects. I would stop like right there. And then I would delete everything else under here until the footer, including this. I would delete everything if I were you. Don't go crazy with it. I just want you to study the code base today. Go look at the lines of CSS. Try to find things that are like confusing. Google those things. Like this is a huge learning day based on somebody else's code base that's huge and foreign to you. Like this is very realistic to those first days on the job. And I want to give it to you sooner than later, so you start getting an idea of how big CSS can be and how we can manage those things. And don't worry, we'll be managing those things with preprocessors. But I think it's great to see just the overwhelmingness of vanilla CSS without a preprocessor, because tomorrow you'll start to see the beauty of preprocessing and how it controls all of our CSS. So if I'm you, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, probably these three. So like maybe Sweet Eats Bakery, great idea, and maybe something else you've done, or even the Sprint Challenge, just to showcase 3 projects that you've already got done. And then again, you could fill this in with content if you want, but you don't need to. And by the way, this is just story. There's many other platforms that you could look at, like many others. I've given you 4 suggestions, but you could use any one you want. The problem is I don't want you to get analysis by paralysis. So I've given you 4 that I think are good, but you can go through and use any one you want. Should be really exciting. So then after this thing's done, you followed all these instructions I've given you line by line. Don't skip a line, please. You can stretch to study the JavaScript and see how it works. Download another template, see if you can get the CSS preprocessor working on your own. Like those are some really good stretch goals right there. The next portion is hosting the website. It's really as simple as a click. So you'll go into your settings for your repo. You'll scroll down to GitHub Pages, and you'll pick the master branch. That's it. It's that simple. So what it'll do is it'll read all your code based in your master branch. So that means your index.html file needs to be on that level. And you'll have, they'll give you a link that you can look at, and it'll actually upload your web page live. They'll give you a gross looking URL, but that's okay. If you want to apply your URL that you own to it, you actually can do that as well. But that's all about under the Learn More settings. And I've given you a video for that as well. So if you come over to, where'd my README go? Back over here, because I'm smart. So over here, I've given you the whole thing on how to get the website done. And then down here, there's a video from GitHub Pages on how to use their own technology if you want to dig deeper. It's amazing. It's amazing what we can do with just a little bit of HTML and CSS skills. So this should be an amazing project this afternoon. You'll have a hosted portfolio web page by the end of the day, and you'll have a lot more respect for somebody else's code and seeing somebody else's code and being like, man, why did they use this? What are they doing here? You should have a lot of good questions and discussion items for your stand-up at the end of the day. Okay, there you go. Let me change these settings back. That is your plan for today. Let me go back to the questions, see if there's anything I missed. When hosting, can we use our own URL? You can, but you got to figure that out, Greg. But you totally can, and it's free. I already have an extensive existing portfolio using GitHub. Should I redo layout? Don't mess with it. If you've got an extensive existing portfolio, don't mess with it. but most people don't. So you are an outlier. Don't worry about that. How we like still do the assignment yourself, like do everything just to see how it works, but don't worry about wrecking your website. How are we going to be hosting? So it's all done through GitHub pages. It's free. Can you recommend some resources for building our portfolio content? I mean, I would honestly just use the template and just swap in content. So this should say great idea web page, a little blurb on what it took. Like this page took HTML and CSS. This is one of my first projects I ever built. And then the learn more button goes to GitHub. And then just rinse and repeat for the other 3 projects. And that's it. Like, don't overthink it. I want you to spend more time looking at the template, swapping in content, more about than that. Project ideas should be Sweetie's Bakery, great idea webpage, and your sprint challenge. Like everybody in this room has those things. If you're listening to my voice right now, you have those things in tow. If you want more than that, build more than that. Like that'll take time. You'll continue to build amazing things here. Trust me, amazing things. And then eventually you'll just replace those crappy things with better things. Because yes, great idea webpage is not like the most amazing thing, but it is something you've worked hard on and you earned. So don't discount it right now. But in the future, we will be doing build weeks here where you build amazing apps, cross-cohort collaboration that are they're going to blow your own mind about how much you can actually do with the team. You'll definitely want to showcase that work on a portfolio. But for now, you might have a skinny portfolio and we'll just keep fattening it up. Okay, let's see. BEM, I don't want to mess with that right now. It's a bigger mindset. So I would say don't touch it right now. Later. Can you recommend some resources for building our portfolio? Okay, so I answered that. Resources, by the way, for images are Unsplash or Pexels. So Pexels or Unsplash. Those are the 2 that I would use. I actually have it in the README file too. So there's Pexels right there. It's royalty free and everything. So every image you get, so if I said technology here, if you wanted a different type of thing that Unsplash didn't have, Pexels is a great opportunity to go look. Except it's taking forever to load right now. So, but those are the 2 that I would recommend for free, like royalty-free imagery. Okay. There you go. Andrew, so just so you know, I don't want people looking at BEM right now. There's a reason I said that like 5 times, because I don't want people getting confused by that compared to all the knowledge that we just gained. So keep that in your mind. Like it's for later, for sure. We're going to be using pre-processing. It kind of conflicts with BEM. So I just want to make that super clear. Let's see. Okay, those are all the questions I saw come in. If we get a lot of hits today, we'll help monetize. If you get a lot of hits today, we can talk about how that works. I like that attitude. Okay, everybody. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow for pre-processing. Focus really hard on your portfolio today. Make it so that we can use it in the future for every project. Like a goal should be uploading a project every time we complete it. Talk to you later.